It depends on your view, your concept of God. You see, we need to be careful not to make God in our image, right? Last time when Kevin spoke, he said we need to better understand ourselves so we can better understand God. But while we're doing that, in the process, we need to be careful not to turn God into our image of ourselves. I can't transform bad experiences into good outcomes. Mostly I can't. And you can't transform bad experiences into good outcomes, but God can. Because God is higher and holier and mightier and more capable of bringing good outcomes of bad experiences even than our ability to imagine. Even than our ability to imagine. So Joseph had a profound sense of the bigness and the greatness of God. Joseph understood that in all things, God is at work in spite of, through, against all human effort to orchestrate his divine purposes. Joseph knew that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. But don't be fooled. Joseph first had to go back in order to go forward. He spent years in a prison. Lots of time for reflection. He had to go back in order to go forward. And so do you. And so do I. How do we do it? Well, very quickly. In your program today, I've included a sheet that looks like this. And it's called a genogram. It's like a family tree. It goes back 3 or 4 generations. This one happens to be a genogram for Joseph's family. And the difference between this and a family tree is you don't just note the different connections between different people in the family, but you actually mark down weaknesses or earthquake events, weaknesses in character and personality, or earthquake events in the family history that have marked that family for generations in some cases. And so this is a genogram for Joseph's family, and I include it for you as an example so that you can construct your own. All right? On the back side of that same sheet, there's another exercise that you can do, which is also intended to help you go back in order to go forward. And each of these will take you 20 minutes to half an hour. I've done it for my own family, and I would encourage you, those of you who are in home group will do the second exercise anyway, but I would encourage all of you, I included it for those of you who aren't in home groups yet so that you can do it as well. All right? So invest that time, and I guarantee it'll be worthwhile. If you thoughtfully complete these exercises, you'll begin to see some family patterns begin to emerge. A picture will take shape. Take note of that picture, because information is part of the tool that we need to live a better future too. Share with those closest to you. Can you imagine? You know, like, one of the things that I deal with is low-grade anxiety. Those of you who work with me know that. It goes right back through my family. My father has it. His mother had it. It goes back. And imagine what my youth and adolescence would have been like if my dad would have sat down with me sometime and said, you know what? This is something that's happened. Some of your relatives have been hospitalized because of this. This is just a Bierman thing that we got to deal with. And I don't know if it's going to touch you. It might touch one of your brothers or your sister. If it touches you, consider yourself forewarned. This is how I deal with it. If it touches your brothers or your sister, here's how you can be gracious toward them and loving toward them. All right? So imagine the impact that would have made instead of having to discover that in my second year of seminary, graduate school. And then begin to put, now I don't harbor bitterness toward my dad, but I'm just saying, if we look at these patterns, we can learn a lot, and we can help others in our family. A spouse, imagine how your spouse can relate if they understand that. Imagine what Barb's got to put up with, right? And then your kids too, right? So take note of the patterns, share them with those closest to you, and revisit them from time to time. I want to conclude with this. Maybe we can dim those lights again, or not. That's all right. Okay, when we choose to make changes in our life, it can feel like things are falling apart. It can feel like we're beginning to have an earthquake inside. We can feel like the tension might be too much for our family members or people in relationship with us. The shaking that happens in our life can be compared, I would say, to breaking the sound barrier for the first time. Both required great courage. The year was 1947, and no one had successfully shattered the speed of sound, which is 1,225 kilometers an hour at sea level. There was this widely held belief, in fact, among scientists nonetheless, that there was this invisible wall of air at or about the sound barrier that would destroy airplanes when they approached it. They thought that this 1,225 kilometers an hour was like a barrier that no one would be able to get past. In fact, earlier in 1947, a British pilot and plane attempting to break that barrier did experience that. The plane could not handle the pressure. The pilot was lost. The plane was destroyed because of the sound barrier. About the same time, the U.S. Air Force was developing a program to put pilots into space. But they couldn't break the Earth's atmosphere. They couldn't get out of orbit before they solved the riddle of the sound barrier. So Chuck Yeager, a pilot, was invited to be the test pilot. His boss, Colonel Boyd, informed him, and I quote, "Nobody knows for sure what happens until somebody gets there. Chuck, you'll be flying into the unknown." His plane had the latest design and the latest technology, but neither the Air Force nor his colonel could guarantee the outcome because no one had been there yet. In the same way, no one has ever lived your life. No one. You may be wondering what happens if you engage in this pathway, this journey toward emotional and spiritual health and maturity. You may be wondering what will happen if you take seriously God's call to discipleship, to put off old patterns of unhealth and immaturity and embrace new patterns. On October 14, 1947, after 9 attempts, Yeager successfully broke the sound barrier. Later, he wrote about it, and I quote, "I was thunderstruck. After all the anxiety, breaking the sound barrier turned out to be a perfectly paved speedway. After all the anticipation, it was really a letdown. The unknown was like a poke through jello." The unknown was like a poke through jello. Now, the point of this story is not that we live our lives at high speeds. In fact, if you're picking up anything from this series, you're picking up that unless we take time to slow down and reflect on our lives, we're just going to repeat things ad infinitum. The point of this is that as you engage in this journey of emotionally healthy spirituality, as you journey into the unknown and as you make these deep and radical changes in your life, it'll initially feel very uncomfortable. It will get harder before it gets easier. But the unknown before you is really like poking through jello. Because God promises that His grace is sufficient for you. His grace is sufficient for you. His power is accessible to you. So know that when you move forward, you will find that God is not only with you, but He is behind you and before you as well. Let me lead you in prayer, and then the band will lead us in a closing song.